So Lizzie and I are going to talk today about these things. We're going to start off by talking about, I'm going to talk about this first chunk here. How do you create environments that welcomes these kinds of conversations, that welcome difficult communication? It's as difficult for us as it is for our kids. Lizzie's going to talk about concrete strategies to open the door for bilateral conversation. And then Lizzie's going to do awesome scenarios around how to talk to your kids about sexual development. She does a lot of those kinds of conversations, so she's gonna. I enjoy it every year we do this. So anyway, all right. So thinking a little bit about every parent presentation that I do, I include this slide. Parenting isn't stressful at all. Jessica, age 27, she says that. And so part of what I want to do is set up sort of the frame, the bigger picture of parenting and all the things we're juggling about it. I'm assuming everyone here has some, we all agree that parenting is kind of hard, that it's a little challenging. Anyone want to throw out some ideas about why they think it's hard for them or other people if you don't want to say why it's hard for you? What? Instructions. Say that.
There are no instructions.
There are no instructions. First thing I have down here, there's like no right way to do it, right? There's not a manual that says you should do this first, this second. There's lots of different books that can give you guidance and sometimes mixed messages. There's not really a manual, right? I think also about how sometimes when we're parenting, we're getting to know our kiddo and we're figuring out what their needs are and how we show them to them. We get it figured out and then they like go on to the next developmental stage. Then we've got to adjust our parenting. Sort of this constant evolution of how we show up, right? And then we have another kid and then they have different kinds of needs, right? And they might have different needs than your first kid did at that developmental level. So there's lots of different moving parts, right? I think about parents also being in the position of taking care, juggling responsibilities. So you might be taking care of aging parents while also managing your own kids, right? And showing up for that. You might be working, managing the household, taking care of the house, but then also working outside the home. You might be trying to manage relationships with family members, keeping up with the household, keeping up with homework, keeping up with lots of different things, lots of competing demands, right? I think also another part about parenting that makes this really hard is that, you know, we're human and we have feelings and sometimes we get activated as a parent, right? So you have kids who are going into puberty and you walk into their middle school and suddenly you remember what it was like to walk into middle school. Like you have that sort of visceral reaction around, oh my gosh, I remember what it was like when I was in middle school or when I was going through puberty, right? And we think about what were our models by way of parenting in puberty. I'm probably older than most of you here, maybe not that much older. We didn't have lots of conversations about puberty and the birds and the bees conversation. I remember asking my mom about it when my oldest was maybe 8, 9. I don't remember having this conversation with you about like sex, birds and bees. My mom was like, oh no, they did it at school, you know. I didn't have to have that conversation with you, right? And so Lizzie will be talking about the details of that and how that's not one conversation, but many conversations. So, you know, we have this like idea of the way things were and how they're very different now and what they could be and should be. I think we also do have those competing demands of like parents chiming in, neighbors chiming in, friends chiming in. This is how you should be parenting. This is what you should do. Your kids shouldn't be behaving that way, right? So we're balancing a lot of different things and it sometimes feels uphill. Let's see what we got here next. So one of the things I want to talk about.
Sounds so unhappy.
It does, right? Oh,
Ah,
can I hand it to you?
yeah, you can. And I'm just
That's
gonna.
one too far. That's too far. Here we go.
Ta-da. There's Jessica.
There she is.
So
She's
sad.
hanging
Okay, now it's
out.
working.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah, that is different.
Keeping it interesting.
Uh-huh. Okay. So we're just gonna go with what's up here. No, they're in different order. I'm not sure what happened. No big deal. Actually, I'll just speak without slides. There's a couple things I think are important to think about before we go into here. One of the things that we experience as humans is we get activated and our brain kind of goes offline. So I'm going to do a little handy model of the brain. Do you guys know who Dan Siegel is? Dan Siegel is he's a doctor who talks, a neurologist, psychiatrist who talks about brain functioning neuroscience. And he talks about, this is your brain. And so if you put your fist up to your head, this is your thinking brain, prefrontal cortex right here. And down here is like your emotional brain. I'm breaking this down very basically. And when we experience something that is overwhelming, that is a lot, we feel anxious, we feel scared, our emotional brain takes over and we flip our lid, right? When we flip our lid, we can't think straight, right? So we literally don't have access to our thinking brain and we are responding from an emotional spot, right? And so when we respond from an emotional spot, do we say things that are awesome? No. Do we do things that are awesome? No. We react in ways that are not super helpful. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So I'm wanting to share these things with you to keep them in mind as you're thinking about parenting your kids. We want to think about how you could increase your awareness around when you're going to flip your lid, that when you do it, you need to bring it back down. So you can show up and talk with your kids directly without saying things that you regret, saying things that you wish you could take back. That's one thing. The second thing about parent physiology is that our anxiety, as parents, we are often anxious, and our anxiety is something our kids feel and our kids pick up. There's a research study that I like to share. Parents and kids are sitting down at a computer, and parents are told, do not help your kiddo on this computer task. They're told explicitly, this is your kid's task, let them do it, don't help them. And kids are wired and parents are wired checking physiology. Task is really hard, kids struggling, kids can't do it. What goes on in parents? What goes on with their physiology? They get jacked up, they get more anxious, right? And then parents, despite being told not to help their kids, when they help them, which many of them did, what happened to their physiology? Parents calmed. Okay, I don't have to see my kids struggle anymore. So I'm more calm. What happens to the kids when the parents jump in? Their anxiety totally goes up, right? And so we need to be sort of mindful of reacting to our own needs as opposed to the needs of our kids, right? And so as a parent, being mindful of all of those things, again, makes it hard to be a parent, but important to sort of keep things in check. All right, so I'm going to read a scenario for you. And I want you to think a little bit about what your knee-jerk reaction might be, okay? So your child comes home from school and is visibly distressed. They slam their books down and burst into tears, telling you that their teacher totally called them out because they walked into class a few minutes late, right before they had to take a test. As tears run down their face, they sob, "This is so unfair." So your kid walks in like that, how might you respond? Knee jerk. Now, why were you late? Great question, or great, fair enough. Anybody else? How might you respond? Can I do it this way?
I always go to, well, that must be really hard, like,
Oh, I'm
sorry, you feel bad, yeah.
Sorry, you feel bad. You seem, yeah, okay.
But tell me more, what was unfair?
Yeah, tell me more what was unfair. Anybody else?
Take a break, take a minute and
Take a minute, breathe, calm down.
then tell me what happened.
Tell me what happened. So, anything else? I had fun kind of pulling these together. Just flying one at a time, but we got this woman going, you shouldn't have been late to class. You're late to everything. Haven't I taught you better than that, right? We've got this one. It's fine, I'm fine, we're fine. You know, it's not a big deal.
Now we're back to the weird format.
It'll blow over by tomorrow. I'm sure nobody even noticed. You shouldn't even worry about it. This guy, how many times have I told you to plan better? Well, what do you expect? If you were late, it only seems logical that you'd get in trouble. It's a natural consequence, right? you know, the cheerleader. You can do better next time. I know you can. Then maybe an anxious dad. I call your teacher. You know, I hope this didn't impact your performance on your exam. Right. So all different kinds of ways that we respond. Part of the reason I'm sharing this with you is just to really encourage you to think about what's driving your reaction and really reflect on knowing yourself. What's going on with you that gets pulled up when your kiddo behaves this way? And these kinds of situations arise. You know, in that moment, what's driving you? You know, what's the priority, right? Some parents, you know, I feel like it's my job to teach my kid lessons. As a parent, that's the first thing. Like, I need to teach them. This is not okay behavior. You know, I need to make sure they follow the rules. If they don't follow the rules here, what's going to happen down the road in life? You know, my job to make sure they understand what the expectations are. You might not be comfortable with your kid feeling sad or scared or worried, right? So that might be what's going on there. You might just be annoyed. You are dramatic, right? Stop being so dramatic. You might be embarrassed, like this behavior reflects poorly on me. You might be worried and you want your kid to succeed and not fail. We had parents of a 10-year-old literally say, like, he's not doing well in class. He's gonna fail out of school and he's gonna not get a job and he's gonna be living in the basement like your Uncle Billy. Like literally in the middle of the session, like unfolded. Like that's how, like just anxiety about it, right? Worried. You know, and then you just might be activated. You might be triggered by this behavior. And so really thinking a little bit about, you know, what are the unintended consequences when you're communicating with them and reacting from the knee-jerk place. And it can really kind of shut them down and it can make them not hear you and not listen to the next thing that comes out of their mouth. Right? They may feel worse after the interaction. They may not come to you in the future. Right? It's a relationship misstep. And it might close the door for ongoing support. We really want to work on keeping that door open. Right? Really, we want to think about validating their feelings. Sometimes we talk about validating kids. Parents get reactive and you think, I don't want them to think what they do is okay. Like if I'm validating them, what does that communicate? The idea of validating is really validating how they're feeling. Not necessarily that you agree with that behavior, not necessarily that you think it's, you know, you get approval, like that's okay. It's really just laying out that I can see you. I can see that you're struggling with this. I'm sorry, this is where you're at. And tell me a little bit more about what's going on. Like opening that door for communication as opposed to shutting it down by scolding, shutting it down by reacting instead of responding. Does that make sense? So that initial vignette, it might sound something like that. Sounds pretty awful. Sounds like you had
A rough day.
a hard day, a rough day. Tell me more about it. Right? So want to encourage you guys to think about prioritizing the relationship, validating your kid, showing up in a way that's curious, non-judgmental, while also doing the job of a parent. We know that in the long term, showing up and having a supportive, collaborative parent-child relationship is a really big protective factor for them moving on through high school, through college years, through adulthood. It's really, really protective. So that's kind of laying the groundwork. Sorry about the wonky slides and the mishaps there, but I think you're up.
I'm up.
Yes.
Can you come switch it up for the PowerPoint? I'm so sorry. It's just gonna really mess with our scenarios later. But I can hang here for a while. You're acing it. I know you for sure are.
Having a rough day.
You're doing great. All right, cool. So, while that's happening, I can provide a little bit of context. So again, my name's Lizzie. My role at Youth Services, one of my roles at Youth Services is I oversee our SHARE program, which stands for Sexual Health and Relationship Education. So we teach in schools, a variety of schools all over the northern suburbs about sexual health and healthy relationships and consent and puberty and all of these fun topics that we're talking about today. So one of my favorite parts of my job is having these conversations with parents, because regardless of whether or not they say this to you, What research consistently shows is that young people consider parents to be their number one resource for information about sexual health and healthy relationships. That's great, right? So that means that you actually have a much bigger impact on your kids' choices around sexual interactions, around sexual health, around puberty, around healthy relationships and consent than any other influence they might have, right? Including social media and their friends and all these other things that we think of as being like the driving force around these choices that actually you, as their adults at home, are actually the most important. And so that's really what we're here to talk about today, is sort of like, how do we create those cultures at home to have those conversations about those topics? So I often talk about this idea of like creating the open door culture. So if we're doing a lot of hand models today. So if you think about, right, I always think about it this way. So think about it as if you and your kid have a door back to back, right? So this is your door that opens and closes, and this is their door that opens and closes, right? And if we think about creating an open door culture, basically your job is to keep your door open as much as possible so that when their door opens just the tastiest bit, you are ready, right? You're ready and you're open and you're there and you're available. And so I always think about, right, like what are the things we can do to leave the door open at the end of a conversation, right? To say like, I'm still here, I'm still there. And recognize, right, that it's not going to be this like constant like conversation, right? It's not going to be like, you're ready to have a conversation, so automatically they're ready to have a conversation, right? We can't necessarily control how our young people show up, right? All we can do is sort of manage ourselves, which I feel is essentially what Renee was just talking about. And so that's what we're talking about, is like, how do we actually do that in practice? So, right, the first thing is sort of like being available, right? Being willing to talk. I think some of the things to think about is like, you know, if you have more questions, I'm happy to talk about it, right? That's sort of that like leaving the door open type of comment at the end of a conversation. When your kids say, like, thinking about when are the times when you naturally connect with your kids, right? For a lot of families, that can be in the car or like at night after dinner when they're like in their room doing their homework, and maybe you do like a stop by, right? For wherever they are. Thinking about when are the times when I naturally connect with my kid anyway, and how can I make sure that I'm available at least some of the time to my kid where they know they can have like my focused attention. Avoiding shame and judgment. Obviously, we're talking about puberty and relationships and things like that today, but I think this is really important around all kinds of things, right? We often will say in youth work, right, we don't want to yuck anyone's yum. So if I say that I love peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and you think peanut butter and banana sandwiches are gross, right? When I say like, oh, I love peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and you're like, ew, who would ever like that, right? What that says is that you don't believe that like that my judgment is valuable, right? That it's dismissive, that something about me, right, is not good or is icky. And so in general, right, we want to avoid calling things gross, icky, silly, disgusting, weird, right? We don't want to call our kids those things because it essentially sends the message that if they share something that we deem one of those things, right, that we're not going to be interested or open to it. Validating and empathizing, right? So like what we just talked about, staying present, right? Avoiding minimizing your child's feelings or experiences. We can validate feelings without validating content, right? You can say like, that felt so unfair without being like, yeah, that teacher sucks, right? Like in the example that we had. And then also, right, this idea of like offering additional resources. Oh, thank you. Oh, are you my slide advancer? Thank you. Thank God we've done this so many times. Okay. So, right, letting go of the need to be the expert or the only adult that your kid goes through. You are still going to be their primary adult, right? Even if they go to other people. I think it's helpful for parents to identify other safe adults that you would like your child to go to around some of these topics, right? To be like, you know, I'm always here to talk if you want to, but if you ever want to talk to someone that's not me, you know, like Aunt Susie is a great person, or you know, Katie across the street is like a great person that you could talk to. Yes, do give that person a heads up. Thank you for folks in the back. Yes, do give that person a heads up that you've like okayed that. Sometimes that can be helpful, but I think it's just important to remember, right, that your kids are a part of a broader community, right? It's not just you on your own, right? So who are your people that you can also encourage your kid to go through? And thinking about your healthcare providers, right, as a part of that team. Who's your kid's pediatrician and how are you connecting with them as well? So some specific sort of like phrases, right? Or what does this sound like? So a non-judgmental response. I love a soy moment. Have anybody heard soy before? Oh, great. Okay. So soy is an acronym. It stands for some people, other people, you might. So it's just like a great all-purpose, non-judgmental way to frame something. So the example is like, if you're thinking about like college selection, right? Some people are really excited about going to a big school with lots of people. Other people prefer a smaller campus with like fewer students. You might like either of those or something in the middle, right? It's like all the options are all good, right? Like you can be anything. So just thinking about ways to offer a menu of options when you want to sort of offer a non-judgmental response. So an example of this, right, might be like, you know, Dad, do you think it's okay for me to date in high school? Right? Like, well, some people have relationships when they're younger, other people wait until they're older. You might decide to do one thing or the other thing, right? It's just like thinking about ways to respond and more open. You may have strong feelings about that. You may not feel that neutral. That's okay. But if you do, right, that's like a way to sort of open the possibility, right? Or keep the conversation open, right? To sort of hear what their thoughts are before you sort of dive in with like, here's what I think you should do, right? Wondering aloud. I love a wonder aloud. Okay, right? Because often when you ask a kid a direct question and you say, like, how was, like, how's it going with Susie? Fine. Right? That's cool, but like that doesn't necessarily tell you anything, right? I think sometimes a wonder aloud is a little bit less pressure, right? They don't have to answer you. It's just saying, like, you're sort of like, ooh, like, well, putting a little thought in there, right? You may not hear about it for weeks and weeks and weeks, but it can be a helpful way to sort of plant an idea, right? Or plant a questioning. So I think the example has like, I wonder if this relationship is the way you expected it to be, right? Which also feels a little more non-judgmental than being like, this relationship's bad, right? I'm not saying you would say that, but just like, right? Or like, this relationship, it seems really stressful, right? Even that might push them to a place of defensiveness, right? To be like, it's not stressful. You don't know me. Like, you've always hated this person, like blah, right? And then validating the feeling, right, versus the content. You'll see that's a theme here. It's because it's really important. That's why it's in here 3 times. Totally.
Shoot.
ORS. That's where we're going next.
Yep.
So ORS, OARS, another acronym, full of acronyms today. This actually comes from a therapeutic technique called motivational interviewing, which is an intervention that was originally designed to address high risk behavior, so specifically substance use. So that makes it very effective when talking with adolescents, right, who are likely to engage in risk behavior, right? Which not because like adolescents can't think about risk, right? They're actually quite good at thinking about risk in an abstract way. But often when they're in the moment making choices, right, they struggle a little bit. So ORS can be this sort of way of having conversations, can be a really helpful way to explore young people's decision making about all kinds of things. So the O is for open-ended questions, right? So avoiding a yes/no question. Right, helps us avoid making assumptions, and you can focus on the positive, right? What do you like about my examples are all dating today. What do you like about dating Katie, right? Like, or what are you enjoying about school right now, right? Something like that. It's more specific than how's it going, right? But it's still broad, right? In that way. An affirmation, right? So validating what they've already said. So like, what are you enjoying about dating Katie? I really like when we hang out and like, I don't know, maybe Katie's into video games and we play video games together or whatever. Like, oh, an affirmation would be like, oh, like you guys play like video games together and that's really fun, right? It's not particularly profound, right? But it encourages the conversation to keep going. Reflections, right? So like, oh, so you really like when you play video games, like, what video games do you play? Well, she really likes this, but I really like this. Oh, so you're saying you like different kinds of games, right? That's a reflection. So here's what I'm hearing you say. And then a summary, right? Is sort of thinking about eliciting the idea of like where things maybe aren't. So that's so great that you love playing video games. Sometimes you like different games. Maybe like you're also noticing, or they've already talked about, right, that like there's some conflict with Katie. So like there are some things you really like about this, or like you like hanging out with her, you like these things, but you don't like so much when she like texts you all the time, right? That's a summary. Like we're holding both. And it's not saying like, so you should break up with her, right? Or so maybe you should play more video games. It doesn't necessarily have a conclusion. You're just sort of like putting the information out there, right? And that sort of. Okay. So that was like big picture stuff. Let's talk about sex. So sexual development, right, in kids is a normal human part of growth, right? All humans go through a sexual development process. It can be very activating, right? To think about your kids going through their own sexual development, right? I have 2 tiny humans right now. I have a 15-month-old and a 4-year-old, right? When I see their cute little faces, I am not thinking about like, oh, you're gonna have sex one day, right? Like that's not a thing I'm thinking. And so sometimes it can feel really big, right? It can sort of cause some of those activated feelings. It is really important to remember that this is normal, right? This is a totally normal human process. Even though it can feel anxiety producing, it doesn't need to feel scary for them. It doesn't need to be bad. It doesn't need to be good, right? It just is. And I think what we want, right, is this idea of keeping in mind our hopes for our kids in the long run, right? What is the sexual life that you want your child to have? I know that's a really weird question to think about, right? You're like, I don't want them to have any sexual life, right? It's a really weird question, right? But when I think about like my kids, right, for example, I want my kids to grow up and have consensual relationships, right? I want my kids to feel fulfilled in their relationships. I want my kids to feel safe in their bodies. Like what are the things that you want for your kid? Right. And I think sometimes that can feel grounding a little bit, right? When we start talking about these like specific parenting scenarios in a little bit, I think it can feel grounding to kind of go back to these like bigger ideas, right? Or values, to remember that of course you want those things for your kid, right? Of course I want my kid to like prioritize her health, right? Of course I want my kid to feel like empowered to ask for what she wants in her relationships, right? And so I think that can be grounding to sort of have that conversation, especially if you and whoever you're co-parenting with are like not totally on the same page about some of these things. That can be kind of a helpful grounding conversation too, to think about like, what are we trying to do here, right? And sort of get on the same page. A reminder, right, that we are going for many talks, not the talk, right? There is not a moment where we're like, all right, talking about sex today, great, check the box, we're done, we never have to talk about it again, right? That's not very effective for a couple of reasons, right? One is that that's not how humans learn. We're not going to retain all the information. If you're just like, here's everything you need to know, they're not going to remember that, right? It also, right, often we do that in a moment where the information is abstract, right? It's like, let me tell you the things you need to know about sexual health, right? Even I teach sex ed, right, in 8th grade. Most 8th graders are not having sex, right? I am talking to them about birth control way before they even are like thinking about needing birth control. That's good, right, for them to have that information, but it's going to feel different when I'm talking about it in this like theoretical way versus later when they're like, oh gosh, I'm worried about pregnancy, right? That's a really different space. And so the kinds of information we need at different times is going to be different. A common misconception is that talking about sex with my kids is going to make them more likely to have sex. That is not true. All of the information, many, many years of research suggests that actually the more adults talk with young people about sex, the less likely kids are to have sex. It actually delays their first sexual experience when they have conversations with their parents about it. Even when those conversations are about like, let me tell you about birth control and condoms and things like that, like having those comprehensive conversations means that young people are more likely to delay their first sexual experience. And that's because they have more information, right? So they're making more informed choices. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about what to talk about when, because I think that's another place where people get kind of over. So before I show you this big chart,
Sorry.
that's okay. Take the chart away.
I'm
It's overwhelming. You're not. There it is.
Okay.
Okay. I know you can still see the little chart, but don't like the chart. It's just like the chart has too many words. It's overwhelming. Okay, so I'm pulling this from a document called the National Sexuality Education Standards. You hear that? It is not from the federal government. I just want to be clear that this is a document that's put together by a coalition of national organizations that are research informed and based on what we know about what kids should be learning about sex and sexual health at different ages, okay? And it's designed for educators, right? So it's designed for people that are in classrooms. But I find it very helpful. You can Google it, you can download the PDF. It's a little overwhelming, but it's if you're like in the weeds and you're like, I don't know what to say, like this can be a helpful kind of grounding place to go. And it talks about the kinds of things that are appropriate and that kids can understand at different developmental levels. Okay, now the turn.
Ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Here we go.
Thank you. Okay. So it starts at kindergarten, right? It goes all the way through high school. But so just thinking about like in kindergarten, right? Through second grade, right? Kids can understand like the medical terms for their body parts, right? Medically accurate terms. They can understand the idea that living things reproduce, right? They can understand that what consent is, right? Kindergartners can talk about consent. Understand that there's different kinds of families, right? All that stuff is all part of this journey, right, of sexual development, which is why I share the kindergarten stuff. I don't think there's a lot of parents of kindergartners in here, but I think it's important, right, to remember that the things you've been talking about all along, right, are also parts of this conversation. So in elementary, right, we're again, body parts, the changes of puberty, understanding that people have different kinds of sexual identities or orientations, that sex can be connected to pregnancy, right? It's okay to talk about that with fifth grader. And then 6 through 8, right, is more specific about reproductive systems, identifying credible sources of information, right? This is important, right? When we're thinking about middle schoolers, right, we want to make sure that they know how to tell whether or not something is like good information. Knowing what different types of sexual behaviors are, understanding abstinence versus birth control, talking about condoms, healthy sexual and romantic relationships, sexual harassment, consent, sexual assault, right? These are all things that we can be talking about with our middle schoolers. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to look the same as the way you'd have that conversation with like a college student, right? But these are all topics that can be talked about at that level. Thanks.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk through some of these like different ways these conversations might come up, right? And some things you'd want to talk about. So if we think about puberty, we always think about like social, emotional, and physical changes of puberty. Obviously, we often first go to the physical changes place, right? Because that's where people's brains are, is this idea of like bodies will change, right? Which is totally true. But there's also a lot of social and emotional changes related to puberty that can, for some young people, feel a little more accessible, like intellectually accessible, before they've happened, right? The idea that like our friendships might be different, or like what a mood swing is, like those kinds of things, right? It's really important, right, that people know the names for body parts, both their own body parts and body parts they don't have. This is sometimes a stumbling block in puberty. When I teach puberty, they're like, but why? Why do I have to know body parts I don't have? And I'm like, we talk about some of the reasons, right? Maybe you might want to babysit someday or have a kid that has different body parts than you. Wouldn't it be good to know what those are, right? Things like that. So thinking about that, and then also thinking about what changes are going to happen to their bodies, right? And then how we deal with them. And the things young people are always most anxious about, not a surprise, periods, wet dreams, and erections. These are the things that young people are terrified of and don't really understand. So it's helpful to have a plan, right, with your kid about how you're going to deal with these types of things when they come up. So here's our first scenario. Are we ready? No, look away.
I know.
I don't know why, but you're not gonna see this, but I'm gonna read you the scenario.
Do you want me to go back?
No, it's fine. I
Okay.
just can't read the scenario. I just can't read it. Okay, so here's we're gonna turn to a person sitting near us and discuss, so be ready, okay? Your 6th grader is working on homework in their room after dinner. You walk past and realize the door is closed, which is unusual. Concerned, you open the door to see your child touching their genitals. What do you do? Turn to a friend sitting near you or a person you don't know sitting near you and discuss. How might you respond? Go. You can make new friends. We're all talking about awkward stuff together. Yeah, we're making it work. We're rolling with it.
I mean,
but it's okay.
Gone forever. So what's that? What I I already see
This?
Follow up.
Really, truly.
Yeah. I don't know. It's right.
Great, okay.
You know, and like, the girl was like, but they wanted to vote to home or something. Right, it's like still. Oh, okay, that's right. No, I know. Have you not?
All right, take like 1 more minute to land your planes, wrap up your thoughts.
Land your plane.
And then one time.
We like to talk.
Like, we definitely.
All right, party people, let's bring it back. Okay, what did we come up with? I heard good conversation. What are some of the things that people talked about?
Are we blocking?
Yeah, I'm blocking. What are some of the things we talked about?
Close the door and check in a few minutes.
So great, yeah, great. What else? Okay, we check in later. What are we gonna say?
That's normal, that's part of it.
Yeah, totally. Totally cool, totally normal.
What if you say, do you want to talk about it? And they say no.
I might not ask first.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, right. I mean, they probably, I mean, my guess is, right, they probably don't, want to talk to you about it. So, yeah, I mean, right. So first, step one, everyone aced this, be cool, right? We don't need to have our conversation right then. We just close our door. I'll see you later. Like, you know, I'll check back in later, right? Or whatever. Again, that's part of sort of, I think I missed this part on the slide, but, sometimes they use the expression of like table face, right? So when I say table face, what I mean is, if I were to be like, that's a table. See what my face is doing? Nothing, right? So trying to hold table face a little bit, right? Oh, I'll check in later, right? It's okay if you don't, but like, again, thinking about how our facial expressions, right, can also be a place where judgment lives sometimes, right? And our kids are pretty sensitive to that. So being mindful, right, of that like table face, right? So how can I hold table face? Cool. So absolutely explaining that this is normal, right? I'm not mad, like it's totally normal. Like masturbation is normal. This like, right, what if it, do you have any questions about your body? They're like, absolutely not. You're like, okay, well, if you have any questions, let me know, right? Like sort of thinking about that, right? And then there's like some guidelines, right? There's some boundary setting here, right? That like this is at this age, right? You're expecting them to explore their body on their own, right? And if somebody else is touching them, you want to know about it. And this piece of like, this is appropriate, like private behavior, right? This isn't something we like do out in the wild. Okay. So thinking about how we communicate our boundaries around that as well. So I would say these things. So to your question of like, do I ask them if they want to talk about it? I would say like, hey, wanted to check in about earlier. I just want you to know, like, it's totally normal. I'm not mad. I just like want to reiterate, right, that like at this point, like my expectation is that we're doing this by ourselves, that we're doing this in private. Do you have any, like, is there anything you want to talk about? They'll be like, absolutely not. We're like, okay, like, let me know, right? But I would make sure you say those pieces first, because even if they're looking at you with like horrified face, like, please stop talking to me immediately. I think this is the moment, right, where we have to sort of persevere, put our like parent superhero cape on, to say the important things, right? Which are like, I'm not mad, you are normal, I'm still here for you, right? We can have these conversations even if they're awkward and uncomfortable, right? Because you probably feel, I mean, I'm sure, right? You're also feeling awkward and uncomfortable, right? But you're also, your kid needs to know that you can persevere through feeling awkward and uncomfortable, and you can persevere even when they feel awkward and uncomfortable, because that's what's going to help you get through conversations later. Does that make sense? Other questions or thoughts about this scenario? Be ready for next step, crushes and boundaries, right? So again, the first place, right, we learn about boundaries outside of our like right, the first place we learn is in our nuclear family, right? But the next place we learn about boundaries is in our friendships. And so when I think about like how we learn about boundaries, right, there's sort of two categories as well. sorry, my animation's over here. The first is sort of this idea of like self-reflection, right? Like intellectually, like what do I think I'm okay with and what am I not okay with? Is that the way we most often learn about our boundaries? How have you learned about boundaries you have? Someone steps over them and you're like, oh, I don't like that, right? And so that second piece, right, that's experimentation. And so I think sometimes when we think about experimentation in our kids, we're like, oh, that's like bad, right? Like if I were to say to you sexual experimentation, you would be like, not my kid, right? And so I think it's important to remember, right, that this idea of boundary setting is often something that we learn through experimentation. Again, whether those boundaries in friendships are things like I let, even thinking early elementary, I let my friend borrow my pencil and then I'm actually sad because it's my favorite pencil and I'm actually not okay with that person using my pencil, right? That's a boundary. But it can also be a part, or like I let my friend borrow my sweatshirt, right? Borrowing is a good example, I think, of boundaries in these ways. Or like, I have a friend who's like really into giving hugs and like, I don't really like that, right? Or whatever. It's helpful to help your kids, right, identify patterns in their own behaviors, right? That's something we can do as outside observers to be like, I can tell that like you don't really seem to like it when this person texts you late at night, right? Or you seem to get frustrated when like the group chat keeps going off or whatever, like whatever it is that you're observing, right? You can just name that. You're not telling them what to do about it. You're just, I'm observing, right? And then also, right, helping young people identify like their own sort of like internal step sign, right? Like, how did you know that you didn't like that? And that it's okay to not know until we're there. The example I often give people about this experimentation when I talk with young people is about like ordering something at a restaurant. So like, how many times have we been to a restaurant and something looked great on the menu? And then we ordered it and it comes and we start eating it and then we're like, oh, I really don't like this. How many people have sent it back? Like many people are like, yeah, right? And so I think it's important to think about how much pressure there is, right? Once we've said yes to something, how much pressure there is to persevere, right? To keep going, even when you're uncomfortable. And one of the really important things about relationships that's different is that we don't actually have to keep going, right? When something is uncomfortable, you can say, no, just kidding, stop. Right? And I think we have to explicitly tell young people that because I don't think it's obvious, like it's not obvious, right? I don't think we like automatically think that way. And it's often very different than the messaging we get about what's polite, right? Or what's kind. And there are ways to be polite and kind while also saying, you know what, I'm so sorry, I thought this was going to be okay, but actually, I don't want to do this, right? And that could apply to a gajillion different scenarios, right? Whether it's like sex or a movie or breaking a rule or like whatever, right? There's lots of situations where we might be like, yeah, this is great. Oh, no. Right? So thinking about how we teach our kids about that, how do they know when they're like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore? And how can we validate that it's okay to change your mind, right? Cool. Okay, scenario 2, look what, okay, Kurt. So you're out to dinner with your family. Your child is continuing to text or message with a friend. They seem to be getting increasingly upset. You are frustrated because you just wanted to have a nice dinner out, and they just can't put down their phone. What do you do? We'll talk this one out loud. I'm going to talk this one out loud because I'm going to make you pair for the next one. What do we have? What do we say?
Your guys are a little frustrated.
Yeah. You seem pretty frustrated right now. I'm not frustrated. Then what? Then what?
Do you want to talk about it?
Do you want to talk about it? Joe's just being so annoying right now. Was he being annoying? Was he being right? So he engaged with it? Whatever. Right? Like then they don't answer you, right? You're like, we're not. Oh no, we're not. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Like so like just validating like it's frustrating when like friends don't do what we think they should be doing. Whatever it like even if you don't know what it is, right? You don't have to necessarily know all the details in order to validate the feeling. It's also okay, like right when they're like, I don't want to talk about it with you, right? Or they're like, you wouldn't understand, like you don't get it. Like, yeah, if you don't want to talk about it now, that's fine. You can also, right, use this as an opportunity to model setting a boundary, even when it's inconvenient, right? To say like, I get it, like, I know this is really frustrating and you're feeling really frustrated right now. We're having a, like, we're doing this right now. So like, can we put the phone away? Can I ask you to step out till you're done? Like whatever feels authentic, right, to your family and whatever your tech boundaries are. It's okay to like help your kids boundary their relationships. Right? Again, thinking about that idea, right, that kids are quite good at assessing like risk and things, right, when they're not in the moment, but their brains are also very susceptible to reward, so they're not very good in the moment. So something that you can do, right, as a parent is help them guardrail in the moment, right, to be like, we're gonna just think about it. Like I said, I have a 4-year-old, right? I'm gonna help your body stop playing with the puzzle, right? I mean, like that's kind of what you're doing, but like in a grown-up way. So things to think about. Okay, this one is gonna be our parent share. Your 8th grader Crystal has her first boyfriend, James. You know that Crystal and James had their first kiss recently. You're not sure Crystal has thought about her boundaries. So how are you helping your kid think about their boundaries? What are some things you might say or do? Turn to your new friend or old friend, talk it out. How are we helping Crystal? Oh, you mean that huge clack in front of my face? Yeah. Cool. Cool.
Hey, this is good.
I don't know. I assume it goes a little after 8. I hope it goes a little after 8. I got at least another one more, I think, in here of select students. Great. Okay, let's go with that.
Yeah. No. If I think we want their contact. Yeah. I didn't know what. I don't have the right. That's what you did with that. That's so excited. So start thinking.
I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna creep on the side and then I'm like afraid to. Amy, I'm just gonna do this. Respecting other people's boundaries. Is there a scenario with this? Everyone look away. Rejecting people. I was like, this is important. Direct is kind. Oh, this part. That was the other part I was thinking about. Sorry for the folks at home. Okay, there you go. Okay, let's bring it back. We'll talk about Crystal. How are people going to support Crystal?
How it made her feel having her. Yes.
Yeah, right. I think there's like, I sometimes like, I think we get to an anxious place and we kind of forget that there's like also some joy in here too, right? Like this is such a sweet, tender moment. Like, oh my God, you know, like you're probably really excited about it. Like, that's really great. Like, can we like lean into that part of it too, right? That this is like, I mean, it's obviously a different milestone than like your first day of kindergarten, right? But this is still a milestone too, right? This is like something exciting for our kiddos, right? So we want to be able to validate and celebrate that as well. Cool. Yeah, absolutely. And then how do we start talking about boundaries?
In a positive way, like ask how it went. Help.
Yeah. How did it feel? She's like, it was great. You're like, I'm so glad. Yeah.
Do you think there are different approaches when it's a daughter versus a son?
I mean, sure, right?
Right.
How would you say they're different?
Well, we were just saying that how both of our oldest are boys. And so we were saying that we would first be excited for them and say like, how did you feel about it? What was exciting, you know, whatever. But then we kind of anchor it with like, now do you think she felt the same way? Like all about consent type of thing and just making sure that this is very respectful and that she wanted this to happen as well and that was all meeting in the middle.
Are you seeing that a lot? Like, I mean, just is consent, we were just talking like, just a typical like college sexual experience, just like, is consent like is it like totally like happening? Like, is that something that's really brought up?
Well, I'm sure it varies, right? I mean, it's definitely something people talk about a lot more. Right? It's like more in the public consciousness, I think, in lots of ways.
Are you seeing the kids you're working with talking about?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I think it's in their consciousness differently too, right? Because it's in the public consciousness differently. I think most young people are aware of what consent is, certainly by like, at least by late middle school. I think most of them know what it is. I think there's still a lot of variation in terms of like, what does that actually look like in real life practice? And I think sometimes where consent message, my personal opinion, I think sometimes where consent messaging gets lost, right, is we give these very like, I don't want to say, like, I have to think of them as sort of like robot definitions of consent, where it's like, would you like to have sex with me? And the other person is like, yes, I would like to have the sex, right? Like, it feels like a very like whatever, like weird robot thing. And that feels like totally unrealistic, right? And if you're an 8th grader talking about like having your first kiss, like what does that have to, like those things feel totally separate, right? And so I think when I teach consent with young people, I talk about consent being like a question and an answer, right? And everybody has to be good question askers and good question answerers, right? And regardless of gender, people need to be both, right? And so I think, and I would say at the same time, right, there's like, we also are swimming in culture, right, which has different gendered expectations around consent and sexuality for men and women. And so I think thinking about, so often what we talk about is like ways to ask good consent questions, right? So yes, those can be verbal questions, right? They can also be like pauses, right, or hesitations. I often with my 7th and 8th graders will use like they don't understand the reference to Hitch, but that's what I think of the movie Hitch, where it's like you go this %, right, and the other person goes the other %. To think about like ways to ask a question, like, and then see if the other person responds. Also thinking about like, I always teach young people that like the best all-purpose consent question is this okay, right? You don't have to like name all the specific behaviors, right? Thinking about nonverbal responses as answers. And things like that. So I think those are all true. I also think it's equally as important to be asking boys, right? Did this feel good to you, right? Do you actually want to be here? Have you thought about what your own boundaries are, right? Because they're also receiving a lot of pressure about what they should want. And sometimes it's not clear whether what they should want and what they actually want are aligned. So I think it's two-sided, right, for everybody, but I think we can understand how sort of like the scale is weighted differently, right, based on the cultural messaging that we're getting about our gender. So that was, I don't know if that was total answer to your question, but I think that's a great thing to bring up. I think this moment, right, this idea of like asking about boundaries, this is a great moment for a wonder aloud, right? This is probably not, I mean, you might have a kid that wants to have a deep talk with you about her boundaries. That might be like way beyond, right? That's like not where she is, right? One of like the magical gifts of being a young person is that your whole life is like right here, right? And one of the magical gifts about being a parent is that your whole life is like, right? And so there's automatically a mismatch, right, between where you are and where your kid is, or where you are and where your kid is. And so I think, right, sometimes all we can do is just predict the future a little bit for them and be like, I wonder if they've thought about like going any further. Like, I wonder if you've thought about your boundaries. And you just like drop it there, right? Maybe she'll think about it, maybe she won't, but you've at least sort of said like, just FYI, this is a thing that might be coming down the pike. Prepare yourself, right? And just sort of being aware of that. In general, right, I always encourage parents not to have rules about specific sexual behaviors because you can't enforce them. So you cannot say to your kid, never have sex, because you cannot control that. However, you can absolutely set boundaries for your kid, right? Like, it's okay if James comes over, but the door has to stay open, right? Because then you can monitor. Or, no phones after X time, or you keep your laptop in the public room, or like whatever it is, right? Like those types of rules you can enforce, right? But you can't necessarily enforce a rule about a specific behavior that they do or don't do because they go other places where you are not. So I just encourage parents to think about that.
What about like asking them to talk to you about it more before proceeding more? Is that like, does that then close the door? Or is that like
I think you can, I would say, yeah, I think I would say like, I really like, I really hope that like, I think you can express a desire. Like, I really hope that you talk with me about this. Because I have some thoughts that I'd love to share. I have some questions I'd love for you to think about, right? Or whatever. But I think we can't can't say like you have to, right? Because like they might not. And I think that it sort of destroys your credibility a little bit around that. I feel like we just started talking about respecting others' boundaries, so I'm gonna go through this, right? This is sort of like the flip side, right, of consent, right? So if we were sort of just started with Crystal talking about like giving consent, right, or giving consent answers, right? This is a little bit about being question askers, right? So I always remind when I ask 7th graders, I do a workshop with 7th graders about sexual harassment versus flirting. And I always ask them, like, what's the purpose of flirting? And 9 times out of 10, they say that the purpose of flirting is to get someone to like you. Newsflash, you cannot make people like you, right? Like you can't make them like you. That's not your job. You can indicate interest. You can express your like desire for someone, right? But you complimenting them is not suddenly going to turn them into someone who's like madly in love with you, right? And so we don't have control over other people's feelings. And sometimes it's just like not about us, right? It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. And this is what's really hard, right? You know, sometimes they're just not that into you. And that's not because you're bad, right? It's because they're just not that into you. And that's really hard for grown-ups. It's very hard for young people, right? And so I also encourage people to think about like, what are the signs that tell us that someone's uncomfortable or not interested? I often use fight, flight, and freeze to help young people think about this, right? So like, obviously if someone's like pushing you away, red light, right? Flight, right? Someone's actively pulling away, also a red light, but also making sure that we teach young people about a freeze response, right? That like if somebody just like goes all rigid and weird, right? That's usually a sign that we need to step back and ask a consent question. Like, are you okay? Do you need anything? Right? Checking in with the other person. And then rejecting someone, saying no sucks. And like, sometimes, you know, I always encourage you, like parents to talk with young people about like telling the truth, right? Like we don't need to lie to someone. You can just say like, you know, like, I don't like you that way, right? Or whatever, but like helping them find words that they feel comfortable with that are allow them to tell the truth, to practice kindness. And then if somebody doesn't respect your no, that's when you reach out for support, right? But they should feel, we hope, right, that our young people feel empowered to say no on their own. And then my Brene Brown, direct is kind, right? And then some tech pieces that I want to cover before we close. So, obviously when we're talking about boundaries, we need to make sure we're talking about tech boundaries too, right? It is important that you make sure that you reiterate, they have heard this, I hope, but please make sure that you reiterate with them that there are risks to having or sharing sexual content online, right? That is child pornography. Even if it's like pictures of themselves on their phone, that is still considered child pornography under the law. And talk with them about what you expect them to do if they receive sexually explicit pictures of someone else, right? That you expect them to tell you about it and then delete it. And that's what the expectation is. I always, when you talk about porn with kids, right, which comes up, that can be a really activating topic for parents. So I encourage people to like take some time and think about that for themselves. However, it is likely that your child will encounter porn, right? Whether they went looking for it or not, it is likely that they will encounter it at some point on the internet or with a friend or something, right? And so being able to think about how you want to explain what porn is to your kid, and talk about your own values around it is really important. What I always encourage parents to say, right, is that often when people create porn, right, they are intending it for entertainment. It is not ever intended to be a how-to manual. Because, right, sometimes when kids are curious about what sex is supposed to look like or feel like, right, that's the model that they're looking at. So helping young people realize that that's not even its intended purpose, right, to help them understand that. And again, thinking about tech boundaries at home as well. So I'm going to skip this part because I want to make sure we have time for questions.
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, people can see that. Keep going, one more. Well, all these more. So I think just like the last piece of this that I just want to leave people with, right? We always want to approach our young people with curiosity, right? Like, what's their experience? I can sit up here and tell you like generalities, right, about students that I've worked with, but you know your kid the best, right? And so figuring out what they're thinking about, asking questions, wondering, leaving that door open. And then helping them find language and communication styles that's comfortable and realistic for them. I think this is often the hardest part for young people. So I often will see young people again when they're sophomores in high school. And by the time we're there, usually they have a pretty good understanding of the basics, right? They might even feel more comfortable knowing like what they're okay with and what they're not. But what they struggle with the most is figuring out what the words are that are going to come out of their mouth to be able to set a boundary with someone else. And so I think encouraging kids to think about that, right? Whether it's just like, I wonder how you would say that. And you don't have to actually say it, but like, I wonder how you would say that, right? Or thinking about that when you're having these conversations about consent to help them think about it. And acknowledging that awkwardness is okay and normal, right? Them learning how to tolerate the awkwardness of having this conversation with you is also the training wheels for them to learn how to tolerate the awkwardness for having conversations about condoms with a partner, right? So I think recognizing that we're like skill building, right, for our kids, for the relationships that they want to have. And so I want to encourage people to think about that as well. So, questions, thoughts, magic, brilliance. Things people are thinking about.
So I have one question.
Yeah.
The spirit of it being an ongoing conversation instead of one. And like, we have 2 girls. And what's like a good way of like both having roles and responsibilities to reinforce those, and like how do you break all that down? You know,
Like between the 2 of you, even.
yeah.
Yeah, great question.
I think there's an element of there's things they want a woman to talk to them about it.
Sure.
So how do we help that?
I mean, I think part of what I would think about is naming it explicitly and just being like, I get it that there are some things you might feel more comfortable talking to mom about, but I want you to know that like, I'm okay with talking about those things too. Because I also think sometimes, again, right, if we think about this as like practice for life, right, I also want them to feel comfortable talking to people of all genders, right, about these things. And so I think it's important to model for them that you could also have those conversations. So I think instead of thinking about it, I think, you can think about it in terms of roles and responsibilities, but I would say it's not necessarily like one parent's job, right? We want both parents to be resources in this way. And so you could even ask, like, here's the thing we're talking about. Like, would you rather talk about it with me or with mom? And they'll be like, oh my God, like whatever, right? Which is okay if that's their response, right? But I think you modeling like, I'm cool, I can do it, right, is important for them to see that too, right? So thinking about those pieces as well. And I think being open to like all the parts of it, right? That like, let's talk about the things you're excited about. Let's talk about the things you're not excited about and being open to those conversations too. So that's not a super specific answer, but I think that's the energy I would bring to thinking about it. Your thoughts, questions?
How do you feel about like like there's the book, Something in the Store? And then there's like upper levels on those books, or like reading them with your kids, or like giving them to your kids to read. And
I love a
like
book.
that.
I love a book. I just don't know those specific ones.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. It's not the store, it's like
Oh, yes. And then It's Perfectly Normal is the next one.
There's like another couple there.
Yes, those are good. I like those. I brought my faves. So I love these authors. Corey Silverberg and Fiona Smith, anything that they write is great. They have a new book called like Sex, like that's a little older than this one that I think is really good. I think as a parent resource for when your kids are older, this is a great book. I would not hand this to a middle schooler. I just want to be clear. Do not hand this to a middle schooler. It's like way more information than a middle schooler needs to know. But I think it's a great, like, it's really comprehensive in terms of like the content in it. So like if you got a wild card question, you could look it up in here. But I love these ones in particular, but I also think that series is good. I have some of those in my office too. And I think absolutely having them available, I think reading them with your kids is great. There's also amaze.com, AMAZE.org, actually. Amaze and Amaze Junior, they have little videos, short little video clips that are like animated video clips about a whole bunch of different topics. And those can be a great thing to also like watch with your kid. If that feels like easier or more accessible than reading a book. And also I've recommended them to parents before too, especially if you haven't had a lot of modeling about like how to talk about sex. I think those can be really helpful videos just to hear someone else talking about it, like to a young person, right? Like, how would I say this to a kid, or how would I talk about this? It can just be helpful to like hear some other language to talk about it. So I think those are a great resource too. But I love that. I love a book mode. I don't know. Are there others you?
Our pediatrician recommended, this is for girls, but it might make a boy version, but it's like an American.
The Caring Keeping of You.
Yeah.
From the 90s onward. It never died. I also read a version of that. Yeah, that's a good one too, for like puberty stuff. There's a great puberty book that was put out. Gonna misremember the title, by the American Academy of Pediatrics or whatever, that I really, really like. That's a puberty book too.
My aunt gave me a book from like the 70s. He gave to my cousin who was like, I have everything I need in this book. And it's like, it's crazy.
I was like, what book is it?
Yeah.
So it's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's so 70s.
I love that.
It's
Like that was a good time for sex ed books. I feel like there were a lot of but yeah, I mean, I think having resources and books in your house is great. So
Do you have any recommendations for a kid that typically isn't that much? Like absorbs information, like it's unfair.
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would think about I would challenge a little bit that that's bad, right? Like I think it's okay. It's hard for you, I think, a little bit, right? Because you're like, what's happening? But I also think it's okay for them to be like in observer mode. But I would also think about like other parenting strategies around communication, right? Is like written communication better? Like I've worked with some families where they like write back and forth, which I think is cute, whether like on an email or in a piece of paper, which has worked for them if there's like something that needs to get talked about, but we're having a hard time. So I don't know if there's others you're
Journal, I
thinking
like
about.
the journal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's others you're thinking of. Yeah.
The journaling is the one that go to.
Yeah. Even if it's like, I've also seen some parents do like set up a journal that's like, hey, if there's ever a thing you want to talk to me about, but you don't want to tell me about, this is the place. And you just leave it on my bed and then you walk away and then I will read it and then we can talk about it. Right. So that they don't have to like come up to you and be like, I gotta talk. Right. Like that can feel scary and overwhelming too.
Like anonymous comments.
Kind of, yeah, essentially like a comment box, right? Like, yeah, 100%. It's just that you know where it came from. So it's like, you know, but like a way to open conversations, right? Like I know it feels kind of silly, but like it's hard, right? To talk about stuff. Yeah, I think those are things I would think about. Thanks for hanging and our scenarios. Great job talking to each other and thinking it through. We appreciate it. And are grateful for y'all being here. Thank you. Yes, it was fine. We rolled with it.